Emily and Olivia Walker had no idea who their real father was, until the day they were confronted by a man who claimed to be him. Thomas Everhart, a billionaire with a legacy built on secrets, walked into their lives at the most unexpected moment, at their mother's funeral. But what neither of them knew was that their connection to Thomas went deeper than anyone could have imagined, and their family history was far more tangled than anyone could have guessed. The day Thomas Everhart received the call about his mother's death, he was in the middle of a high-stakes business meeting. His phone buzzed, and when he glanced at the screen, his heart dropped. It was his lawyer, a name he rarely saw pop up on his phone unless it was serious. The lawyer's voice was steady but carried an undertone of urgency. "Mr. Everhart, I'm afraid your mother has passed. She was found at her estate this morning." Thomas, who had always kept a certain distance from his mother, felt an unexpected pang in his chest. Their relationship had been cold for as long as he could remember, and the grief he expected didn't come. Instead, a quiet numbness settled over him. He hadn't spoken to her in nearly 2 years, and before that, their exchanges had been strained, forced, always about business, never personal. She had raised him with an iron fist, shaping him into the man he was today, but never offering the warmth or affection one would expect from a mother. His mother, Vivian Everhart, was a woman of sharp edges, someone who never showed vulnerability, who preferred to command respect through control and intimidation. After the meeting ended, he stepped out of his office to catch a private flight back to his family estate. He didn't know what to expect at the funeral. He hadn't planned on attending at first. There were no tears to shed, no overwhelming sense of loss. It was simply a matter of duty, a chance to tie up loose ends. As the flight carried him home, his thoughts were clouded with memories of his mother's cold glares, the expectations she had forced upon him, and the long silence that had grown between them in the years following his divorce from Natalie. Arriving at the chapel, he felt the weight of his family's legacy bearing down on him. The massive stone building seemed imposing, its high ceilings and somber decor reflecting the severity of the Everhart name. The family was wealthy, powerful, and highly private. Everything about their lives had been shrouded in secrecy. He found it almost ironic that his mother, who had lived her life keeping everything in perfect order, would now be gone, leaving him to manage the aftermath of her control. As the service began, Thomas stood at the front, gazing down at the casket. The atmosphere was heavy with formality, punctuated by the murmur of the few family members and acquaintances who had gathered. His eyes scanned the crowd, expecting the usual faces: distant cousins, business associates, people who had long since learned to keep their distance from the family. But there was one face that immediately caught his attention: his ex-wife, Natalie. She stood at the back of the chapel, her presence out of place in the sea of unfamiliar faces. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, their divorce marked by years of bitterness and animosity. Their marriage had ended in secrecy and betrayal, and since then they had gone their separate ways, he to his empire, and she to an undisclosed life that Thomas had never inquired about. Yet, there she was, standing quietly, her dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, her expression unreadable. Her appearance was unexpected and unsettling, stirring something deep in Thomas that he wasn't prepared for. Natalie had never been part of his mother's inner circle. In fact, Vivian had never approved of her, always criticizing her as unworthy of the Everhart name, Yet somehow Natalie had appeared uninvited at the funeral, as though drawn by some unknown force. Thomas quickly looked away, trying to refocus on the ceremony. But his mind raced. Why was she here? And more importantly, what was she doing in his mother's funeral? It was a question that gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside, telling himself it was just one of many oddities that life often presented. Little did he know, this moment would be the catalyst for a series of revelations that would shake his entire world to its core. The funeral ended quietly, the mourners dispersing in small groups as they filed out of the chapel. Thomas stood near the back, his mind still unsettled by the sight of Natalie. She had disappeared by the time the last guests had begun to leave, and the lingering questions about her presence weighed heavily on him. His heart wasn't in the formalities. He simply needed to get through the day to move on to the next step. But before he could leave, something happened that would make him rethink everything. As the reception unfolded at the nearby estate, Thomas tried to keep to himself. He spoke with a few family members, nodded politely at old acquaintances, but his thoughts kept circling back to Natalie. Why had she come? What had drawn her here after all these years? It was almost as if she had a purpose, something important she needed to reveal. The air was thick with tension, the kind that lingered after a death, a type of silence that held more weight than words ever could. Just as he was starting to convince himself that he should focus on the next steps of his mother's estate, a young woman approached him. She had a striking appearance, tall, with long blonde hair that seemed to shine under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Her eyes were piercing, an intense blue that seemed to study him with an almost unnerving precision. She looked out of place. At first, dressed in an understated but elegant black dress. But there was something about her that caught his attention immediately. "Mr. Everhart?" she asked softly, her voice almost tentative, as though she wasn't sure whether to approach him or not. He turned to her, raising an eyebrow in surprise. "Yes?" "I'm Emily," she said, offering a small, tight-lipped smile. I'm close to Natalie." Thomas felt a stir of confusion. Another connection to his ex-wife. He didn't know what to make of this. Was Natalie's past still creeping into his life? But before he could respond, Emily continued speaking, her words coming in a rush, as though she had rehearsed them 100 times before gathering the courage to say them out loud. "I know this is strange, but I have to tell you something. It's about your family, your mother, about me." Her words seemed to hit Thomas like a wave, crashing over him with unexpected force. "About me?" he repeated more to himself than her. Unsure of where this conversation was headed, Emily didn't wait for him to process. "I'm your daughter, Mr. Everhart. I'm one of the twins you never knew about. And this is Olivia, my sister." Thomas froze. The words didn't quite register at first. His mind scrambled, trying to make sense of what she had just said. His daughter, a twin. He had no recollection of any of this. He had never been told, never even suspected. His eyes darted past Emily to the woman standing just behind her, Olivia. She looked almost identical to Emily, as if they were two halves of the same person. They both had the same striking features, the same sharp blue eyes. It was as if the world had stopped turning for a moment, leaving him suspended in disbelief. He tried to speak, but no words came. He was paralyzed by shock. For a moment he wondered if this was some kind of cruel joke, a play for attention. But the sincerity in Emily's eyes made that unlikely. The reality of the situation began to sink in, and with it, the overwhelming rush of emotions he wasn't prepared to face. "I know this is a lot to process," Emily continued, her voice soft, almost apologetic, "but we need to talk. There are things you need to know about why we were hidden, why no one ever told you about us." Thomas could feel his chest tightening. Everything about this moment felt wrong, too surreal, too jarring to make sense of all at once. He didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to do with the sudden flood of information that had been thrust upon him. His mind raced to find a coherent thought, but it was hard to focus. He looked at Emily and Olivia again, their identical faces staring back at him, as if they were waiting for him to decide what came next. But before he could even attempt to make sense of it all, the room seemed to shift around him. The air grew heavier, thicker, with the weight of secrets. And just like that, before he could say anything, both Emily and Olivia turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The encounter with Emily and Olivia had been enough to rattle him to his core. As the evening wore on and the reception continued in full swing, he found himself lost in his thoughts. He kept replaying their words in his mind, trying to piece together a narrative that made sense. But nothing added up. His mind flicked back to his marriage with Natalie. He had always known it had been complicated, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Twins, daughters, hidden from him, and all these years he had been completely unaware. The silence in his mind was deafening, broken only by the distant chatter of family members and the clinking of glasses. He excused himself from the reception and walked out into the cool night air. The vast, sprawling estate felt oddly empty, the grandeur of the Everhart family home now seemingly hollow, devoid of the meaning it once had. He didn't know where to go from here, didn't know who to trust. The suddenness of it all made his head spin. Later that night, when Thomas finally returned to the estate, his lawyer was waiting for him. Edward was a man who had been with the family for years, handling legal matters with the utmost discretion. He was reliable, professional, and always appeared composed, an island of stability amidst the chaos of Everhart family affairs. But as soon as Thomas walked into the study, he knew something had shifted in Edward's demeanor. The lawyer was seated at the desk, papers spread before him, his fingers nervously tapping on the surface. "Mr. Everhart," Edward began, looking up at Thomas, "I think it's time we address some things." His tone was grave, more serious than usual. Thomas didn't sit, he didn't need to. He was already brimming with questions that needed answering. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice steady but edged with frustration. Edward hesitated, then slid a folder across the desk. "This is everything we've been able to find about the girls, Mr. Everhart. Their birth records, adoption, papers and other documents. The twins are not just someone your ex-wife introduced to you on a whim. They've been kept hidden from you for a reason." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the folder. As he flipped through the papers, the evidence became undeniable. The twins, Emily and Olivia, were indeed his daughters, biologically, legally, but they had been hidden from him from the moment they were born. The birth certificates were there, sealed away in a file that had been carefully managed for over 2 decades. It was as if someone had been working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that the truth never came to light. The adoption, Edward continued, his voice quiet, was arranged by your mother. Thomas's head snapped up, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. His mother had done this? She had orchestrated the disappearance of his children? He had always known Vivian to be controlling, ruthless even, but this was far beyond anything he could have imagined. She had not just kept the twins from him, she had made sure they were erased from his life completely. Edward pushed the papers forward, each one more damning than the last. From what we can gather, your mother had a strong disapproval of your marriage to Natalie from the start. She saw her as a threat to the Everhart legacy. When Natalie became pregnant, your mother took matters into her own hands. She arranged for the twins to be adopted out of state, away from any connection to the family. Your ex-wife had no choice but to go along with it. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. His mother, the woman who had always claimed to care about family above all else, had plotted the complete erasure of his own children. He couldn't comprehend it. What else? He asked, barely able to keep the bitterness from his voice. What else did she do? Edward hesitated again, as if he was reluctant to reveal more. She also arranged for a large sum of money to be set aside in trust for the twins. She made sure that they would inherit a portion of the Everhart fortune once they reached a certain age, regardless of whether you ever knew they existed. It was all part of her plan to make sure the legacy stayed controlled in her eyes. And it's why she never told you about them. The words hung heavy in the air, and the weight of them nearly crushed Thomas. His own mother, the woman who had raised him with such a sharp hand, had essentially made a move to cut him out of the family fortune by ensuring that the children he didn't even know existed would inherit it. His empire, the life he had built, had been an illusion, always on the edge of being taken away. He had fought for everything he had, but his mother had already secured a future for the twins. They were now the rightful heirs, not him. The realization hit him hard. He wasn't just dealing with the shock of discovering he had children he had never known about. He was up against a ruthless, calculated plan that had been set in motion. Long before he could understand its consequences, Thomas knew he had to face the twins. He needed to find them. He needed to know why they had come into his life now, after all these years. But more than that, he needed to reclaim the future his mother had taken from him. And for that, he would need to confront the ghosts of his past, his mother, his ex-wife, and the twins who were now bound to his fate. The search for answers became an obsession. Days passed, and Thomas found himself digging deeper into every shred of information he could uncover about Emily and Olivia. He couldn't fathom how his mother, whom he had never once considered capable of such deceit, had orchestrated something so elaborate. It was all so well hidden, buried under years of careful manipulation. He barely slept, his mind racing through every angle. But one thing kept nagging at him. Where were the twins now? His first lead came when he tracked down a former associate of his mother's, a man named Peter Granger. Granger had been close to Vivian for years, handling many of the family's business affairs and maintaining her private interests. Thomas knew that if anyone could shed light on his mother's hidden dealings, it would be him. The meeting was set for a quiet, discreet lunch at a private club. As he sat across from Granger, he could sense the man was nervous. Granger had always been a smooth talker, able to navigate the Everhart family's murky waters without a ripple. But today he was twitchy, avoiding direct eye contact. When Thomas finally asked about the twins, Granger's face tightened. I wasn't supposed to tell you about this, Thomas, Granger said, his voice low. Vivian was very particular about certain things. She didn't want anyone interfering with her plans. Thomas leaned forward, his frustration mounting. I don't care what my mother wanted. I need answers now. Where are they? Where are Emily and Olivia? Granger hesitated, his fingers fiddling with the wine glass in front of him. Your mother made sure the twins were taken care of. Adopted into a family in Montana. Quiet people. A couple by the name of Walker. They're well off, but they live a life away from prying eyes. Your mother ensured that they wouldn't be found easily. Thomas's mind was reeling. Montana. Of all the places his mother could have chosen, she'd picked somewhere remote, out of the way. It was perfect for hiding secrets. Granger continued. The Walkers were paid handsomely to raise them as their own. Vivian was meticulous about ensuring no trace of their true identity ever surfaced. The more Thomas learned, the angrier he became. His mother had gone to great lengths to ensure that the twins would never know him, never know the truth. For all those years he had been living a lie, thinking his life was complete, that he had everything. Yet the people who should have been closest to him had been kept from him, hidden in the shadows. Granger's voice pulled him back to reality. I know where they are now, Thomas. They've moved on with their lives, but they're not entirely unaware of their true parentage. There are whispers, rumors. People talk when they know something important. Thomas didn't hesitate. He was done waiting, done being kept in the dark. He arranged for a private jet to take him to Montana the next morning. The moment he set foot on that quiet, foreign soil, he felt the weight of everything that had been kept from him. The air was colder than he had expected, the landscape vast and empty. It was a stark contrast to the crowded, expensive life he had known. It was as if the universe itself was trying to remind him that this part of his life, this new chapter, was something he had never prepared for. The town of Willow Creek was small, its streets empty, the only sounds the distant hum of a few trucks passing by. It was peaceful, isolated, everything Thomas had never been. He found the Walkers' address easily enough, but standing on their doorstep, staring at the modest house that looked nothing like the grand estate he had grown up in, he felt a sense of foreboding. When the door opened, it wasn't the twins who greeted him. It was a middle-aged woman, her face lined with years of hard work, her eyes wary. Her presence alone told Thomas everything he needed to know. This woman, though kind-hearted, had likely raised the twins with the same care and love she would have shown her own children. But now, Thomas was intruding on that life, on a world that was never meant to intersect with his own. She didn't seem shocked to see him, as if she had been expecting someone like him to arrive one day. But when Thomas introduced himself, the woman's expression softened, a knowing sadness in her eyes. She invited him inside, where the twins, Emily and Olivia, were waiting. The moment he saw them, his heart clenched. They were older now, their faces mature, but their eyes were unmistakable. They were his daughters. "Hello, Mr. Everhart," Emily said, her voice calm but guarded. Olivia, standing beside her, gave him a silent nod, her eyes studying him, as if trying to gauge who he really was. "Are you really our father?" Olivia finally asked, her voice steady but edged with uncertainty. Thomas could barely breathe. They were standing right in front of him, the children he had been kept from for so long. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, But now, as he stood before them, he wasn't sure how to begin. His mind scrambled for the right words, but he knew there were no simple explanations for what had happened. The truth was complicated, painful. "I didn't know," he said finally, his voice cracking. "I didn't know you existed. My mother. She kept you from me." The twins exchanged a look, one that spoke of years of unanswered questions, of a life lived in the shadows, of secrets. Thomas wasn't sure what he had expected, perhaps anger, perhaps disbelief, but what he saw in their eyes was something more unsettling, quiet acceptance. They had known, or at least suspected, for a long time, and now, after all the years of separation, they had come face to face with the truth. But this moment wasn't just about them meeting their father for the first time. It was about the tangled web of deceit that had shaped all of their lives, pulling them together, whether they were ready for it or not. The silence that followed Thomas's words was almost suffocating. He could feel the weight of the twins' gaze, the years of unspoken questions and hidden truths pressing in on him. Emily and Olivia didn't speak immediately, as though they were weighing his admission, trying to process everything that had just been revealed. For Thomas, this moment felt like a dream, a nightmare perhaps, where nothing made sense. But everything was painfully real. "Why now?" Emily finally asked, her voice softer than he expected. "Why after all these years?" Thomas felt the lump in his throat tighten, his mind scrambling for a reason that would make sense to them. "I didn't know about you," he said again, though the words felt weak, hollow. "My mother. She made sure of it. She didn't want me to know. She didn't think you should be part of my life. She had her own plans." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy with the pain of their meaning. Vivian, the woman who had molded him into the man he was, had taken steps to ensure he would never meet his own children. He could only imagine how that must have felt to Emily and Olivia, their entire existence manipulated, their identities erased, and for what? Power, control. He had never understood his mother's cold, calculating ways, but now it was as if a whole new layer of her cruelty had been revealed. Olivia crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. She wasn't angry, not yet at least, but there was a deep sadness in her eyes. "So you're saying we've been hidden from you? For what? Because your mother didn't approve of us? Didn't approve of our mother?" Thomas nodded, the weight of his words settling on him like 1,000 pounds. He had never thought of his mother as someone who would do something so damaging, so deliberate. But now he understood. To her, his life, his legacy, was all that mattered. And she had kept him focused on it for years, so he would never question. The decisions she made for him never looked deeper into the life that had been kept from him. But why did she keep us? Olivia's voice cut through his thoughts. If she didn't want you to know about us, why raise us? Why go to such lengths to make sure we were safe but still hidden? That was the question that had gnawed at Thomas since he first found out about them. Why? Why go to such lengths to control the narrative of their lives, to keep him from being their father? There was something more to this, something he wasn't seeing. She wanted to make sure we were safe, Emily added quietly, as if remembering something she had learned long ago. But she also made sure we knew our place. She knew we'd want to know the truth one day. And she made sure we could find it when the time was right. Thomas's mind raced. Was it possible that Vivian had known he would eventually seek them out? Had she planned for this moment, knowing the day would come when he would try to reclaim what had been taken from him? Emily's eyes softened, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just about you, though, was it? It was about control, about keeping things tidy. You were always meant to inherit the family empire, to keep it all in the Everhart name. But we were never part of the plan. We were just a complication. The words struck him harder than he expected. They weren't wrong. For his mother, the family's wealth and reputation had always been the most important thing. And if anything threatened that, she had done whatever it took to eliminate it, including erasing 2 of his children from existence. Thomas took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to make up for lost time. But I want to try. I want to be a part of your lives now. The twins exchanged a glance, their faces unreadable, before Emily spoke. It's not that simple, Mr. Everhart. You can't just walk in and expect us to accept you. We've been raised by people who love us. Our lives, they don't revolve around you. We're not some missing piece of your legacy to slot back into place. The sting of her words was sharp, but he couldn't argue with her. They were right. He had no right to expect instant forgiveness or acceptance. His presence in their lives wasn't something they had been waiting for, hoping for. He had been a ghost to them for years, just as they had been to him. And now that they had met, the past could not simply be erased with a few kind words. Olivia's expression softened just a fraction, her voice quiet. We don't need a father who shows up only when it's convenient for him, or when it suits his interests. We don't need a savior, Mr. Everhart. What we need is time. Thomas nodded, the weight of her words settling over him like a cold fog. He didn't expect them to accept him immediately. He hadn't even begun to process everything himself. But he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. He had missed so much, but he wasn't going to let that stop him from trying. No matter how complicated the road ahead would be, no matter how much they resented him for his absence, he would fight for a place in their lives. As the evening wore on, Thomas realized that this was not just about reclaiming his children or the family legacy. It was about understanding them, about learning who they had become without him, and perhaps even allowing himself to learn who he truly was without the shadow of his mother's influence looming over him. The twins were no longer pieces of a puzzle he could simply fit back into place. They were individuals with their own histories, their own pain, and now they would have a chance to build something new.